We're taking a look at a Craftsman T110 rider this morning. Customer brought it in and said that the battery will not stay charged, that it keeps dying on them. We're going to take a look and figure out what's going on, and I'm going to show you how to diagnose the problem and get that taken care of. This thing is only, I think, a year and a half old, he said. Let's see, it says date of manufacture is 4/21. Looks like the battery's February of 22, it says. Now this is a pretty small cold cranking amp battery they have in here. This is 150 cold cranking amps. Very low cold cranking amps when this thing has a Briggs & Stratton 17.5 horse in it, I think. Yeah. So that's a pretty big engine for the starter to turn with 150 cold cranking amp battery, especially if it gets cold out. This thing probably won't last much longer. They were probably lucky to get the first year out of it. Yeah, we're gonna test this battery real quick though. It was dead. This morning I put a 10 amp charge on it. We're gonna see what it says. So I'm gonna turn this to volts DC, which is here. The squiggly line is gonna be volts AC if you were ever to use this for something else. And then we use this beep symbol up here a lot. That's the one there to the right. We use that just a ton for finding connections. So on this, between the two, a 10 amp charge at about an hour should get you exactly where you need to go as far as voltage on a battery like this. This one says 12.54 volts. So it's got good voltage to it. We're gonna go ahead and pull the negative off and see if we're getting any kind of drain on the battery. Now the way you do that is you keep it in that same voltage setting, and you're gonna remove the negative from the battery. Now you do want to make sure all of these connections are very tight. You don't want those to be loose at all. That ignition switch should be off when you're doing this. And the key, you should pull it out. So I just pulled the key out. Negative is off. So there are a lot of different meters out there. I know everyone's got something sitting around, you know, that looks about like this. Basically what we're looking for is the DC amp setting, which the DC is a line with 3 dots below it, and then the A for the amps. Now you can go to the highest setting or the medium setting, either way. I always like to go to the highest setting when I'm doing this. Now again, there's tons of different models and stuff you guys could have when it comes to something like this. This is the one I like to use. It's got an analog meter, then it's got a DC 10 amp. So basically with the negative disconnected, if you check in between the two and you've got your meter going, see if I can't get that up a little bit better. Yeah, we can see that pretty good. Now it's going to show, so if you touch between the negative and the outside with the key off, you shouldn't get any reaction at all out of that needle. So this needle should not move at all. If it does, you know that something is drawing off of that battery, and all I'm doing is touching the negative terminal and then the negative of the battery on this side. But if you get any draw at all or any movement out of that needle when you've got that there with the key off and everything, you know you have an issue. Let me go turn the key on and show you what happens at that point. This is just basically a pass-through at this point. So you see the needles moving, keys on, keys off. So that's just the solenoid as I turn the key on and it draws voltage. So it's showing you that draw. There should be no draw with the key off and the key out. If there is a draw, you know you have a parasitic draw somewhere, and you can test that by unplugging miscellaneous things one at a time to figure out where it stops. So if you have this issue and you've got a draw, say your key's out and everything right now, you can come over and you can start unplugging things. One of the most common ones we run into is either the stator or the regulator. A lot of times right here on the side there's a box and it's got 2 wires that plugs in here, and then there's a wire that goes to the tractor. That's on many different models. They go bad a lot and they'll ground out, but you can test this right here. If you're showing amp draw, unplug one thing at a time. So come over and say, okay, I'm going to unplug my stator. Well, if you don't have an amp draw at that point on your battery, you know, if you go back to the back and it shows no amp draw, you know that your stator was the cause. Now this one's got just a little diode that converts that AC voltage that the alternator or stator is putting out and converts that into a DC voltage. It just kind of smooths the waves out to charge the battery on this version. But if that's not the case, if it's not the regulator, which usually sits here, or it's not the stator itself, you can unplug other things. I mean, it could be a bad ignition switch. It could be anything electrical on this thing can be drawing electricity, could have went bad and be grounding out. Check those things if you're getting an amp draw on the battery. I'm going to check this while we got that negative off with a load tester. Now it shows good here, a little over 12. As soon as I hit it, we're down into all the way into the 7, which is horrible. We should be, if this thing was good, it should be just in this yellow way up here. This battery load test bad. We're going to put a new battery in it and go from there. Now again, make sure these connections are tight when we're putting this battery back in. I'm going to probably install that off camera. And then also the ground wire comes, the black wire from the battery comes down and attaches to the frame. If this is loose at all or rusted or anything like that, you want to pull that bolt out, clean that whole thing up and reattach it. Make sure that there's no rust or anything in between any of those. Sand it down real good. Now your fuse is also down here at the bottom. There's a little tab. You can push this in and push it through to get to the fuse, which is just on the back side right here. You can see it here on the right. New die-hard 340 cold cranking amp battery is in. We're going to go ahead and run a load test on this just to show you what a good load test should look like. So if we're on the positive and the negative, so we're showing good as far as the voltage goes. When I hit it, yeah, we're running right down there into about the 400 or just under as far as the cold cranking camps goes. So this battery is good. It's not going all the way down into the bad or the weak section. Have yours tested at your local place. It's probably the easiest way to do it. When I replace these, I always use a 1/4-20 stainless steel washer and nut. Now, these are just going to stop from rusting as much as other nuts and washers. Otherwise they end up rusting out and rusting up, and then you can't even get them off the battery when you need to switch them out when that battery's bad after 5 years. Or 3 or 2, depending on what kind of battery you're putting in it. These usually last pretty well. They're all pretty susceptible to being out in the weather. If you're leaving them outside and it's windy and out in an open area, it normally doesn't seem to last too long. My area at my house, it's kind of closer to a field. I usually replace my battery every year if I forget to bring it in. So I'll put our little locker back on. Battery is all good. We are going to test this battery as we fire this thing up and see what kind of voltage we're actually getting to it. The charging system could still be bad at this point. If it is bad at this point, we'll want to address that, and I'll show you how to check all that out. Right now, all we've really done is kind of diagnosed the battery being bad. So we're going to start it with some battery testing on here. The positive and the negative. I'm getting about 12.45 volts on this. And then I'm going to fire it up real quick. We'll see what we're getting once it's started. So it is continuing to climb like it should. That is what a battery should do once it's started. Now that should top off right around 13.8 or so volts. If it doesn't, you definitely have an issue. Now to test your output from your stator, you find the 2 wires coming from underneath the flywheel. Now on this one, it's got that DC rectifier I've talked about, and that just smooths out the waves to make it into a DC voltage. Charge the battery continuously. It's used on models that don't use a lot of amperage at all. It's a real slow charge to the battery. You may have something like this where it's got this is your stator that sits underneath the flywheel and charges. It puts out this AC voltage. Now on this one, you notice down here it doesn't have that in line. So it doesn't have that diode or rectifier or whatever it is that smooths out those lines. This one here plugs into what I was talking about, the voltage regulator, which do go bad a lot. A lot of times they sit on the side like such. There's a couple different designs of these, but these go bad a lot. If you unplug that again and you notice that the amp draw on the test we did earlier stops, you know that it's bad. Anyway, here on this one, since it's got the diode, you're gonna go ahead and test DC voltage coming out if you're gonna test the voltage between these 2 pins on the inside. Now that should be right around 13.8, 14, somewhere in there. Anywhere between 13 and 14 is fine. On this one, if you're testing, you'd test the 2 coming out from underneath the flywheel, and you'd actually test the 2 pins here, and you should be testing AC voltage coming out, because that is actually AC voltage until it goes into the rectifier, which converts it from that AC into a single line DC going out. Now if this isn't grounded well, sometimes you'll run into issues with that. Just another mention about the amp draw. This thing's charging up fine though, so we're not having any issues with amp draw or with charging on it. This customer essentially thought there was a big issue, you know, with his battery not staying charged, since the battery is practically brand new, but it's a piece of junk battery, you know, they put in from the factory just to get it out the door and down the road. So that solves that problem on this one. Hopefully this helps you if you're having issues with drain or battery not staying charged on your riding mower. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.